Hello there, John Cuturillo here, the counsellor of your listener. Thank you for joining me for this episode. Well, you heard correctly, I am the counsellor of your listener, not the life coach. So what changed exactly? Well, as I'm about to explain to you, nothing in reality has changed. Today I'm going to be explaining why I'm now going to be using the term counsellor to refer to myself, but also I'm going to be talking about the life coaching industry and the helping professions of a somewhat alternative nature, and specifically the ethical concerns that I have regarding the industry of life coaching and the associated professions. Now, as per usual, before I begin, never take what you see or hear on the internet as advice. I'm not going to tell you what sort of help you should get. All I'm suggesting is if you do need help, seek advice from a professional. Build a rapport with a professional and seek advice from them. Also, in making this episode, I'm not practicing elitism or talking ill of any particular life coaches or saying that life coaches in general are scammers or incompetent or ineffective, because as you know, I've had the good fortune of collaborating with a number of life coaches on my podcast, and based on what I see with them, they are quite competent and ethical practitioners, and that means that there must be ethical and competent practitioners of life coaching. So I'm certainly not aiming at them, and I'm not aiming at any particular life coaches, but I have seen quite a few ethical concerns in the life coaching industry, and they need to be addressed because in the end, we are helping people with vulnerabilities. And where there are people's vulnerabilities, we must honour their trust and we must be practicing sensitively. And that's what I'm going to be discussing today, where I believe the deficiencies are in that. Now, to begin, the reality is that I was never a life coach in the cultural sense of the term. As I have said in the past, when you're a helping professional, there is a set of skills that everyone should have. Okay, basic helping skills, listening skills, and knowledge about psychology that I believe every helping professional needs to have. And when a particular person presents with a particular problem, the way that two helping professionals approach that same problem, if they're both competent, should have factors in common. Okay, they should be largely practicing with a common set of values, ethics, and techniques, because those techniques have been tested across time and we know that they're effective when we're helping people with problems. That's in theory, though. In practice, I've found that how people who call themselves counsellors practice and how people who call themselves life coaches practice to be quite different. Not just in terms of their interactions with their clients, but also with regard to how they present themselves in public. In Australia, as it stands, counselling is not a legally regulated profession, meaning that even though there are laws which we must abide, there are no legal standards that dictate what qualifications or accreditation a person has to have in order to use the title counsellor. There are, however, private bodies that accredit counsellors, and this is certainly something that can help a counsellor in their standing, and especially if they're working for a clinic or another organisation. As it happens, I am currently in the process of obtaining professional accreditation with a body. Now, I hold a bachelor's degree in psychological sciences, and for a number of years I've worked in the mental health and social services domain. I was a volunteer counsellor for some time, and I also worked in the social services industry for a considerable time, and in that time I was working with a range of different clients with a range of different needs, some needs quite complex, and I was not only working with them one-on-one to help them overcome their problems, but I was also helping them to interact with other professionals in their care. Now, if we use common English, a counsellor is someone who sits down with someone and helps them overcome problems, and I would intuit that most people would agree with that definition. So in that sense, I was a counsellor, but none of the roles that I fulfilled in the industry were actually labelled counsellor. I can only conclude the reason for that is that in this so-called progressive economy and industry culture that we have, employers just love reinventing the wheel and inventing new terminology to make them sound more enlightened. Counselling is an old school trend of yesteryear. We don't have counsellors, we have these new fandangled professionals. In reality, folks, as you have heard me discuss, and you will hear me discuss, the nature of phenomena in the human race does not change that much. We are not that much more enlightened. We're certainly progressing, but sitting down and helping someone, whether you call someone a counsellor or otherwise, is still the same job. Now, Why did I call myself a life coach? Well, occasionally I tend to be a little bit too conservative with risk. That's one of my personal vulnerabilities, and I was honestly wary of using a term that was assigned to somebody by a particular professional body, even though legally I was perfectly entitled to use the term counsellor, and competency-wise I was entitled to use the term counsellor because I have counselled people. And in reality, even though professional accreditation is excellent, looking at my education, I've had more experiences than I can count in the social services and helping professions that prepared me in ways that an education couldn't. And I will maintain to this day that that experience has moulded me into the person that I am today, and nothing could have educated me more effectively than those experiences. I'm starting to realise that I don't believe people fully understand what I do when I call myself a life coach. And in fact, most of my clients, the way that they conceptualise me as a counsellor. They often mention, when they're mentioning their interactions with me, they're often mentioning terms like therapy and counselling. They see me as a counsellor, so they recognise the archetype. And so in the cultural sense, in the way in which it's generally practiced, life coaching does not describe what I do. I'm a counsellor. And from this point forward, I will be distancing myself from life coaching as a term and the pop culture that surrounds it, and I'm going to explain why. Now, again, I am completely in favour of a free market, and I'm in favour of choice, which means as long as professionals are being completely honest about what they do, people should absolutely have the right to choose who helps them. But when we're helping people with vulnerabilities, we also have to be critical of how we're practicing, because we have us helping professionals have a lot of responsibility. So when there's a problem, we need to address it. And today that's what I'm going to be addressing. Now, to start, even though tradition is not always correct, what I appreciate about the traditional helping professions like counsellors and psychologists is, even though ethical codes are by no means perfect, they have very prominent and strict ethical codes about how they practice. Some of the ethical precepts I consider to be absolutely essential, but I don't necessarily always see them in the life coaching and alternative helping professions. Some of these most important ethics are that everything that the practitioner does must be for the client's benefit. It must be in aid of helping the client achieve their chosen goals. It cannot be self-serving. That protects them from exploiting, either deliberately or inadvertently, their power or the client's vulnerability, and potentially leading the client in a direction which is not in their best interests. It also avoids overly commercialising the job and exploiting people's vulnerabilities by persuading them to accept services which they may not necessarily enter into with completely informed consent given their vulnerabilities. It also demands that we use evidence-based practice, which is what I'm going to discuss in a minute. Let's consider some of the main problems that I have witnessed in the life coaching industry and the alternative helping professions. First of all, a lot of these professions make use of alternative practices that are not necessarily tested in the way that traditional counselling and psychotherapeutic modalities are. Now, I've discussed this before, but to recapitulate briefly for those who may not be familiar with my work, when we scientifically test a treatment method that we're considering introducing, we have a very specific set of procedures that we have to follow to ensure that when we observe how that treatment is operating, we're not simply observing good results because we're telling ourselves they're good results. We're not simply observing good results because we have an emotionally vested interest in the success of the new therapy, and we're only seeing in it what we want to see in it. The human mind is prone to biasing how we interpret information based on our previous knowledge, based on our expectancies, based on our suggestibility, based on emotions. And the Western scientific method is designed to minimize the influence of that when we're observing the results of a particular therapy in testing. So we have that strict methodology in place, even though it's not perfect, and even though it can be used for the wrong reasons and it can be corrupted. We use it because it minimizes the chances that when we conclude that a therapy is actually effective, that it's due to any of our own biases. In other words, with this method, if we find that a particular therapy is effective by any metric that we use to measure effectiveness, it's likely that it actually did have the desired effect on the clients, and that any success that we observed was due to actual change and not just due to us telling ourselves that we were observing what we wanted to see. A lot of modalities haven't as far as I can tell, met that standard of evidence. And in addition to that, there's also something of a culture of anti-Western medicine, what you could call conspiracy theories in the alternative professions. I'm not big on using terms to label people, but that's what they seem like, in which certain practitioners treat anything that comes out of Western medicine or Western science as some kind of conspiracy to sell treatment. Now, again, any system can be corrupted, and I'd be perfectly happy to sit down with someone and talk to them about what their opinions are on Western medicine. I'm certainly not a elitist, and I'm not going to start judging people for having a different opinion. But I've approached quite a few of these individuals and asked them simple questions such as, so what evidence do you have to suggest that your viewpoint is correct and that the Western viewpoint is wrong? And I often get quite vague responses that have nothing to do with providing evidence. Now, if you're a practitioner and you genuinely believe that your system is better than something that's been supposedly tried and tested, wouldn't you want to communicate quite clearly that that's the case? I mean, if you have that conviction, wouldn't you want to make it clear that you know what you're talking about? The fact that people don't tend to present solid evidence suggests to me that, to be honest, those people, their heads might be in the clouds. They like to think they're being edgy and cool by going against the grain. And again, going against what's common isn't necessarily bad. Sometimes what's common isn't in people's best interest. But if you don't have solid evidence to suggest, or at least a solid argument, then it tells me that you're just trying to be edgy for the sake of being edgy. And that's incredibly unethical as a helping professional. A lot of these modalities also are associated with spirituality. And again, I'm not judging people who are spiritual, but I have approached quite a few people and asked them, would you like to collaborate and would you like to talk about the evidence for Western science versus the evidence for spirituality and discuss where the strengths and weaknesses in each view of the world are? Only one person has accepted that, Ebony Wamaki, with whom I collaborated some time ago, and that was an excellent episode. Both of us, in our respective professions, were completely honest. We both were willing to discuss both the strengths and the weaknesses of our potential, of our viewpoints. And that sort of transparency as a helping professional is what you need, because, again, people are paying you to help them with their vulnerabilities. You have to be completely honest, and you have to have a solid set of arguments and a solid collection of evidence to suggest that what you do is actually likely to be effective, or at least not harm the client any further. I've even seen some people claim that they've invented new therapeutic modalities in the last 5 or 10 years perhaps. Remember that most of the therapeutic modalities using psychotherapy have existed for at least 2 to 3 decades and often have their roots in modalities that are significantly older than that. They've been tested over that time in numerous different studies. That's why we trust them. Again, I'm not going to discount that some people can be ingenious and can invent new solutions to problems. And again, I'm not going to say that everything from the West is correct. But based on the combination of these somewhat extravagant claims that people have discovered these miracles that are going to be the cure for all problems, and the fact that they seem to be correlated with some other ethical concerns that I'm going to discuss throughout the rest of the episode, I'm extremely doubtful. And I would feel incredibly uncomfortable as a client walking into a treatment that hasn't been tested. Now, another major ethical concern that I've seen with life coaching has been its incredibly strong relationship with commerce. A lot of life coaching practitioners, and I discovered this because a lot of them have podcasts in which this particular feature is apparent. A lot of them have backgrounds in commerce and sales and marketing and the corporate life. And often what I see is, especially podcasts that claim to be about personal well-being, but then when you look at the episodes, a lot of them are actually on wealth accumulation and finance and economics. And a lot of the practitioners who publish this type of material and implement these so-called coaching programs, they often follow the rhetoric that I was an executive once, but I hated the lifestyle and I decided I wanted to help people. But then you look at their marketing, and their marketing is very much corporate marketing. They present themselves as corporates. They also use the same marketing tactics that big business uses. They make extremely sensationalized claims about just how effective their coaching methods are, which I'll discuss in just a minute. And that equates to essentially contradicting what they claim the change they made in life was. Often these people espouse a lot of rhetoric about, defeating evil materialism. They call materialism evil. The West is a producer of decadent materialistic culture. But then there they are talking about wealth accumulation and talking about well-being as being constituted by being able to run a successful business. I'm all in favour of commerce, and I've said that before, but it's not everything, and you cannot measure well-being by monetary success. It's only one measure of success, but there are other fundamental measures of success. A lot of them also don't seem to be qualified to work with the human psychology that is relevant when someone has a problem. Okay, sure, many of them would be qualified as sales coaches, coaching on how to improve your sales, coaching on how to start a business, coaching on how to market more effectively, how to be more effective in performance. But when someone comes to you with a life problem, just because you run a successful business doesn't mean that you are qualified to work with the vulnerabilities in human psychology that comes with having other sorts of problems. Stay in your lane, because it is completely legitimate to coach people in sales, marketing, and business. But don't assume that that automatically generalizes to the human psychology of other problems, because it doesn't. Sometimes human psychology can be far more complex than business. Business is complex, but trust me, as someone who has his own mental illnesses and has worked with some incredibly complex clients, the sales approach and the personal training approach is not necessarily going to work for them. It could even be potentially harmful if you try and push that hardcore, we will smash out this success approach to people who are already quite vulnerable. There are also numerous businesses that are actually focused on helping coaches market themselves more effectively and find more clients. And often on social media, I get automated messages from these businesses. I even received an email once from some marketer asking if I would consider hiring professional actors to make videos to advertise my coaching services. In the traditional helping professions, this sort of practice, while not necessarily always, I don't know if it would necessarily be prohibited, but it would most likely be frowned upon. Why do these businesses exist? Because there's a demand. These businesses wouldn't keep functioning if people weren't paying for the services, which suggests that coaches are selling way too liberally. When there are people out there with problems, approaching them like an ambulance chaser and saying, do you have a problem in life? I think I have the solution for you, is incredibly unethical, and traditional helping professionals don't do it. Why? Because we want to make sure that the choice to accept treatment is completely in the hands of our clients. Something else that I've seen a few times is therapeutic approaches that are protected by intellectual property laws, meaning that only people who pay for a license to use them, or the creators themselves, are allowed to use those therapeutic modalities. As far as I've known, I've never seen a traditional psychotherapeutic modality that's been restricted by trademark. And again, if the psychologists and psychiatrists who worked on developing those modalities and spent years and years of their life investing in research and hard work in order to develop them and to test them, wouldn't restrict them by trademark because they wanted them to be available to the general population of counsellors and psychologists so that they could also use them, what makes a life coach think that it's ethical for them to do it? Again, I have an ethical problem with that, and I'll be completely honest about it. If you look at the marketing that is done by a lot of life coaches, also they use a lot of pop psychology. They use a lot of overly simplified claims, and you see it all over social media. Claims like, it's your mindset that's the problem. You have the power to change. A lot of these lines they're only using because they know people are effectively suggestible enough to see great value in them. But let me tell you, simple lines like that do not indicate a deep knowledge of psychology. They're pop psychology tropes. They've been used for years. I've seriously am starting to wonder how many of these people, if I were to approach them and say, okay, can you explain the mechanisms by which anxiety causes harm to the individual, or can you explain the mechanisms by which mindset affects an individual's life? I'm starting to wonder how many of them would actually be able to explain those mechanisms in terms of evolutionary theory, in terms of executive functioning, in terms of neurological functioning. It's concerning that people are touting themselves as qualified to work with human problems when they may only have a surface level knowledge of how the human mind actually works. Now, following from this concern, there are also a large number of extravagant claims being made about the coaching methodologies that are used. Let me preface this by saying that even the most qualified helping professionals like psychiatrists and psychologists will never guarantee results, because they know that the human mind is just too complex for a mere mortal to be able to guarantee what's going to happen when a certain therapy is implemented. And yet, a lot of coaches are touting their approaches as the answer to people's problems. This is the secret you've been looking for. This is the solution. They often persuade people by using hyperbole or self-talk like, you're worth it, you're powerful, you're boss. A lot of people are gullible enough to think that this indicates some kind of deep insight into the human mind. People are being railroaded, okay? They only use these lines because they appeal to people's emotions. This type of self-talk is actually intellectually dishonest, because in reality, no one can tell you what you're worth and what you're not worth. No one can tell you how much power you have. In reality, a good helping professional has to help you decide for yourself what behaviours are best to help you achieve your goals, and then evaluate whether your actions contribute to or detract from your self-worth. Self-worth is a complex area, and it's more than just a single social media post can evaluate. I do see a lot of unprofessional language. For example, coaches saying, my friend. Hello there, my friend. I'm here to help you. No, we're not friends, okay? We need to maintain professional boundaries with our clients, because as nice as it sounds, if we get too close to our clients emotionally, we're not going to be the most effective. We are potentially going to be sacrificing the quality of the intervention we provide, because our minds are going to be more focused on the emotions of our relationship than on the professional aspects of our relationship. Also, could we please stop using expletives? I'm trying not to be a prude, and I'm trying not to judge here, but swearing every second word doesn't do anything for your credibility, in my opinion, and it certainly is not making you sound more relatable. To be perfectly honest, I would not want to see a counsellor who swears every 2 words. I'm sorry, it's just uncouth. In reality, there is no secret, okay? You can't have it all. In life, there are a lot of complexities that contribute to how we function and how problems work. There's no magic secret, and there's no success guaranteed. Right? As I said, proper helping professionals never promise this. So if someone tells you that they can guarantee success, then they're lying to you, because no one can, and that is an absolute fact. Also, using examples of success like how this person became a millionaire is again designed to tantalize people so that they are more likely to buy whatever program or material that person is selling. But really, a lot of large successes in life are due to luck, because the bigger success that you find, the bigger the risk you take. In reality, that chance could have just as easily gone bad as been successful. So all the most popular material seems to be from people who are making the most sensationalist statements. It seems that the statements that appeal most to humans' emotions rather than to people's needs are the ones that gain the most in popularity. But I can tell you, ideas only become popular because they appeal to people's emotions. People don't respond to reason as much as they do to emotion. That's why we as helping professionals have to be a voice of reason and have to ensure that we're not over-marketing ourselves and not selling services and products to unsuspecting, vulnerable individuals. Yes, we have to be confident, but there's a line that we shouldn't cross. When I see all this overly simplified self-help talk in the media, it's not proper helping, it's marketing, it's sales. Human problems, especially mental health problems, they're becoming incredibly popular to discuss in social media. But the concern I have is that popularity waxes and wanes. In reality, mental health should never stop being discussed. We need to discuss it often, because it has always been a problem, and as long as the human race remains in its current state, as much as reasonably predictable, it's always going to be a problem. So we have to take it seriously, and we have to stop talking in hyperbolic language. We have to tend to it sensitively, and we have to stop treating it as just a trend to make us look socially conscious. Okay, I see this a lot on social media. People making these oversimplified, this is why you're anxious, or this is why you have trauma, or this is why you got triggered. Here are my absolute secrets that are going to make you an absolute star at fighting anxiety. Okay, this makes you an absolute boss at managing your mental health. This type of sensationalism is only used to attract popularity. But popularity doesn't necessarily indicate validity. In fact, a lot of things become popular because they appeal to people's emotions, but not because they're correct. People react to their emotions when they're exposed to them, but they don't necessarily hold truth. Helping professions should not be straying into this kind of sensationalist marketing. There are a couple of other things that I've seen that cause me concern. One of them is coaches admitting that you have to invest large sums of money into their programs in order to work with them. The traditional helping professionals do not guarantee success and do not sell you programs. You pay for one appointment at a time with them. If people who have studied this hard and have worked with human psychology for so long and work with such complex clients can't guarantee success and don't sell a preset number of materials at 4 figures to start, what gives a life coach the right to be telling people that you need to invest 4 figures in this program that is going to solve all your problems? In reality, you don't even know if all the material you're selling in those cases is absolutely necessary. I've actually had clients who, after one session with me, we've evaluated their progress and they said, "John, thank you for your help. I actually know what I need to do now. I'm ready to move on without you." It's not every client, it only happens rarely, but why would I be selling a 4-figure package to that person when all they needed is one session for 3 figures? Proper helping professionals know that the human mind is too complex to know in advance whether an entire set of material is necessary. We work with each client on a case-by-case basis, and we tailor our approach specifically to each client. We don't use carbon copy information full of pop psychology rhetoric. Again, not proper helping, it's marketing. Something else I've seen is people making one-on-one coaching sessions public via podcasting, and coaches actually coaching publicly. Counsellors and psychologists would not be able to do this because it's unethical. So again, why is it being done in the life coaching industry? Remember what I said earlier, everything we do must be in the best interest of the client. Making a session public is self-serving. It's to market us. It's not going to benefit the client any more than if the session was private or in a group therapy session, which still has confidentiality standards. This is just not ethical in my view. The next concern I have is with self-serving marketing. The way that coaches and other alternative helping professionals have marketed themselves, again, really has me concerned. You often see a person's website full of images of themselves that were taken in a glamorized photo shoot, or their profile picture on social media is them at a microphone, implying that they're speaking to a large number of people, talking themselves up as totally boss, using cliched terms like thought leader, using lots of flowery language on their website, but sometimes I've even seen people using lots of flowery language about what they do on their website, but never actually concisely stating, "I am a life coach and this is what I do." Some people don't even have their contact detail on their website, which suggests to me that these people are saying, "You don't get to contact me, I only contact you if I'm happy to work with you." Let me ask you something. A lot of these people have the rhetoric of, "I stand for the little person, I'm helping the little person, ordinary people." If you market yourself in such a glamorized fashion, you're not relatable, and you're not talking to the little person, you're selling an ideal. You're saying, "Look at all this glamour, I know that your heart desires this, and I'm selling this to you because I know you'll respond to it." A particularly humorous encounter that I had was I actually once wrote to a particular podcaster who was also a coach apparently and asked them if they wanted to collaborate on an episode. I didn't receive a reply back from them, but their receptionist, they didn't say this exactly, but in effect what they were trying to communicate to me was, this person only interviews people of particular social status that can help them maintain their image. And then ended the email on, "Thank you for all the wonderful work you're obviously doing." How is it obvious that I'm doing work for the good of the world if you haven't even listened to my podcast or you haven't even been a client? Because I can guarantee that person did not listen to any of my material. Finally, something I'd like to mention is the overuse of the term trauma. I have PTSD and borderline personality disorder. I've suffered trauma. I'm not going to invalidate people's trauma because I know how trauma works. What I am going to say though is that having an argument with your best friend once or breaking a nail is not going to cause you trauma. And yet all over the social media of some of these so-called helping professionals, these alternative practitioners or spiritual therapists or life coaches, we see them discussing how everyone has childhood trauma. The reason we have specific language to refer to specific phenomena and specific events and conditions is so that we can talk about those phenomena with precision, so that when we use the term, another professional will know what we mean and that it constitutes a specific phenomena. Not all types of adversity are trauma. People are starting to use the term trauma to refer to any type of adversity because it seems to be catching people's attention. It gets people to follow them or like them on social media. See, I'm using the term trauma. I recognize your trauma. I'm validating you. And look, validating people is important, but it's not everything. Okay, and not everybody has experienced trauma. Again, I'm not gatekeeping, but it is absolutely a fact by clinical standards, not everybody has experienced trauma. Having one existential challenge is not trauma. Trauma is severe and it affects your daily functioning. That's trauma. I'm not so much taking aim at people who suffer trauma as I am taking aim at people who are using other people's mental illness to virtue signal and stand on their graves saying, yeah, you see, I care about all these poor traumatized people. And yet, as I said before, their marketing tactics are ones that actual trauma therapists and psychologists would not be caught dead using because they know that over-marketing is wrong. When somebody is vulnerable, which is the reason why somebody seeks help in the first place, because they have a vulnerability that they'd like to overcome, they have a challenge in their life. Proper helping professionals know that when someone is vulnerable, you must honour that by being respectful and placing limits on what you do. You cannot over-market yourself because when you start to take those actions, you start to lose sight of, and again, I've talked extensively about how emotional and cognitive bias affects our judgment and can lead us to act in ways that we really shouldn't without even knowing that what we're doing is wrong, because our mind is sometimes that powerful. If you start allowing yourself to market yourself too liberally, eventually you'll start taking actions that are even less ethical and less ethical and less ethical, and that's where problems arise. There's a reason why the traditional helping professions have such a strict code of ethics, and all helping professionals should be abiding that. Now, I know a lot of you are probably going to think I'm being somewhat judgmental, and if you are, I'd be more than happy to talk to you about it. But we need to discuss the helping professions and how the new age helping professions are developing, because it is an ethical concern. Okay, I know how the mind works. Okay, I've had a lot of experience working with people. Allowing ourselves to just turn the helping professions into a pop psychology Wild West without having a deep understanding of what it actually takes to help someone change, how problems actually operate, and really just how complex people are, and just using simple, surface level statements to persuade people, and using cookie cutter carbon copy programs that we sell to people claiming that it's going to solve their problems, we're doing people a massive disservice and we could end up harming people. And I'm not afraid to say it because it has to be said. Again, when you hold this much responsibility, you must be open to constructive critique. And this is my constructive critique. But nonetheless, thank you for joining me for this episode. As I've said, if you have concerns about yourself or someone else, please go seek professional assistance. Okay, don't take what you see on the internet as advice. Don't take somebody's spiel on social media about trauma as advice. Go speak to a professional, someone you trust. And whether you agree with me or disagree, I would love to hear from you because, as I've said, learning happens where disagreement is. So if you have a different perspective, please feel free to write to me. I'd love to have you on the program. We can talk about some of these topics. Let's educate our audiences together. So until next time, take care.